Very. My son Matthew participated in a couple of ones locally, and he did one out in Utica also, the first Mohawk one. He's up at
Nice.
Clarkson. Yeah, I probably met you there or something.
Pretty sure Ryan holds the award for most TAC Upstate wins.
The first year Matthews and his team participated, they got I think it was a TCG player award, or I forget, it was this big box with all this cool stuff in it. So they donated it to FM High, to the computer science teacher to use. Pretty cool. That's my claim to fame. My son can code, therefore.
Well, it looks like we've got everyone we normally do for office hours. So Ryan and Kelly, if you want to introduce yourself, we are fortunate enough to have your upcoming instructors starting on Monday with us.
Hi, I'm Ryan Goss. I'll be teaching Module 5 for the next 2 weeks, starting on Monday. A little bit of background about me. I did teach in the Cohort 1, the same module. So this is a curriculum I've been through once before, but this is the first time I'm doing it remotely. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that changes things. But yeah, looking forward to it and see you on Monday.
I'm Kelly. I'm going to be TAing for Ryan this week. I am a graduate of Cohort 1 of Careers in Code, so I have gone through this module. So I'm looking forward to experiencing it again with all of you, and also seeing how it works virtually. I think it's going to be really fun. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Well, you know how it goes. I've got nothing planned. So if anyone has questions, feel free to fire them off.
Hey Max, can you go over functions and maps again?
Sure can.
Thank you.
So give me 1 second and I will get set up here. So lots of different ways of looping over an array, right? We've done our for of loops. We've done our for const I equals 0. We have used a couple different things, but there are two newer ways of mapping over an array. One is dot map and the other is dot filter. So I find whenever I want to loop over an array, but the end result is not a new array, like if I just want to console log out all the properties in the array, right? I'm going to use my for of. But there may be a time that we want to get a new array out. So the example we used in class is we've got our array of objects and our objects all have the text in them of the message. So what if I don't want the timestamp and the who sent it and all of that? All I want of that array is the message text. That's when we would use a map to say, hey, we've got our const messages equals and then our array and our objects and all of that stuff. But if I want just an array of the message text, that's when I would map over it. So let's do that in practice. Let me share my screen here. Why is VS Code not an option to share just that window? That's weird. Give me 1 second. My computer has decided that it would like to run as slow as humanly possible as soon as I would actually need it, which is, okay. Let's see what we can do here. So I'm going to say playground.js, and I am going to say, all right, let's have, we already did a messages example. So let's say, let students equal, and we'll do our array. And then in our array, we've got a student with the name of A, and they've got a grade of 100. And then we've got student name with B and a grade of 90. And then we've got our student name C with a grade of 80. So if we wanted to get an array of students' names, we could take our students and dot map over them. And so what's going to come into our students is a function, and that function will give us access to the individual student. So basically what's happening here is because we call dot map, we're calling it on dot students. Dot students we know is an array, which gives us the ability to map over it. And so what we are doing is this function is getting access to an individual student. So in here, if I just console log out my student and I run my node playground.js, oh, I might be in the wrong directory. And make sure I have my object form properly. So we get access to each individual object here, right? So we know it's access to the individual object because it doesn't have the square braces around it, which means we are now accessing the individual object and not the entire array. So because of that, now that we have access to the student, we can also get access to just the student name. So if we run our array again, we get A, B, C. Okay, well, that's great, but what we want to do is return our student name into our new array. So we can just return our student.name, and then whatever gets returned here is what's ultimately going to end up in this student's names array. So if we come down here and we can console log our students' names, I'm going to remove this console log up here, we see that our new array ends up with A, B, and C in it. So there is a little shorthand to get this down. If this makes sense to you, that's completely fine. But we can use some newer JS syntax to break this down into let students' names equals students.map. So all that is the same, but we're going to take advantage of our arrow function. So we're going to say student, and then we will pass in student.name. And that by leaving out the curly braces, we can also skip the return. So if we save that, run it, we get the exact same output. So this is just the shorthand way of doing your map up here. Any questions around that? Was that helpful? Did that answer a little bit of what you were looking for?
It did. I was having trouble with it yesterday, but this example definitely, yeah, it's much better. Thank you.
Awesome. And just so we have lots of different options here, we could do this with a traditional loop too, right? So we could say let students' names equal an empty array, and then we could use our handy dandy for of loop as well. So we could say for const student of students, and then inside our for loop, we could say students names dot push. And then what do we want to pass in? We want to pass in our student name. So we're looping over the students, which is giving us this whole array. We get access to the individual student object here. And then inside of our loop, we grab our students' names array and push, add into the end of it, the student.name. And so we could run that and also get the same result. But like I said, when we are the end result is a new array instead of, just working with the data inside the loop, I tend to use something like a map as opposed to using a traditional for loop and building my array manually. But all different options. So I will copy and paste this into the pasted code channel in case anyone wants to reference it down the road. Other questions?
I actually was wondering, I have a meeting with Jason in a couple minutes, so I'm gonna pass out. But if I worked on my loop for like assignment 34, would I be able to screen share? So
Yeah, go for it.
I think I did it right. I somehow understood loops a little bit better. Okay, hold on.
That is surprisingly the point of the homework, is to hopefully get more understanding.
Well, yeah, but I usually sit and go, oh God, okay. But no, it worked out better. Okay.
Awesome.
Is that sharing? Okay.
Yes, you're good.
So I went through, obviously, yeah, if you could see, I thought that was hilarious, but did the log the right way, like the normal loop.
Yep.
And then I did map and function, or map and I still need to do filter again, right? To go down one more.
Yeah, so you don't have to build the filter on your existing map. I think in my example, I just filtered over the original array, not the array that we mapped. But either way, it is completely fine. So I think in my example, we filtered basically off the same way that you did your for const day of days if day attended. So it would be, you could use a filter to write the same code that you have between 26 and 32.
Okay. Now, I mean, where my concern is, like, I don't see where it goes deeper from this because I've got obviously the attended and the days run for both. So is there something I'm missing here aside from that?
No. So this
Okay.
example was more just to expose you to the fact that map and filter exist. So you're achieving all the functionality between lines 26 and 32 that the dot filter example uses. But this homework assignment was meant to be like a 10-minute, 15-minute homework assignment. It is not, you're not missing anything.
Okay, that was just, I wanted to verify. Okay, thank you.
No problem. Yeah, you totally got the whole concept of like, hey, we've got an array and our array has an object and we want to work with those objects inside that array, right?
That's,
so like,
yeah, I got to the nesting finally.
awesome. Yeah. And the other assignment will give you a little more practice on schools and teachers and nesting down in there. But once you get your hand on nesting, and you also get your hand around map and filter, you can start using them together to create some really powerful things. Other questions? No problem. Sorry, no problem responding to the thanks in the chat. I realize that not everyone has the chat window open and they think I'm going crazy saying no problem.
We all know you're crazy, so it's okay.
I think you've got to be a little crazy to teach.
Hi, Max. It's me, Fabilia.
Hey.
Hey, can you review linking pages?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Give me 1 second. Okay, so I am going to kick off my screen share again. I'm actually going to open my laptop monitor so I can share 2 windows at the same time. Man, my computer is not happy working on a Saturday. I have no idea what's kicking around in the background, but it's got to be something. All right. So I'm going to share this. I'm going to grab my VS Code. I'm going to bring this over. Okay, so pretty easy. We just want to use our A tags and be careful of our file name. So I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to save that. So I just hit Command S. I'm going to put it in my downloads folder. You can put it in your My Code folder, wherever you put them, as long as the files are right next to each other and they're in the same folder. That's what's important to be able to link between them. So I'll call this one page1.html. And I'm going to use my exclamation mark tab to just get our HTML template started. And I will call this page 1. And then I'm going to throw an H1 in here that says page 1, just so we have, so we can tell the difference between the two of them. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to pop open a new page. So I just hit Command N there. You can also go up to File, New File. That's easier. We're going to save that. And I'm going to save that as page2.html. And again, the important thing is that these files are in the same folder right next to each other. So I'm going to get a new file started. I'll call this page 2, and I'll throw an H1 in here for page 2. So I'm going to come over to the right here. I'm going to right click, reveal in Finder. And of course, it's going to open on the different monitor. I'm going to double click to open it. And up comes our page 1. Okay, so we can get to our page 2 by going up to this URL bar and just changing it to page 2. But what we want to do is we want to link those two together. So whenever we link, we're going to use our anchor tag. And so I'm going to come back to our page 1, and our anchor tag is just an A. And what do we want to link to? Well, we're going to say our href is equal to page2.html. So that's the file name. And then we'll put whatever text we want to show up inside the link inside that A tag. So we can save that. We can refresh. We come over here. We get our page 2. And when we click on it, we jump over to our page 2. And so to practice that again, we can go to our page 2 file and we can add our A tag, and our href is going to point to page1.html. And then what do we want to put in there? We'll get very creative and say number 1 instead of page 1. So we come over here, we refresh, our link shows up. And when we click on it, we get over to our page 1. So it's as simple as using our A tag, using our href, and then putting in whatever the file name is. And make sure you include your file extension in there, which is going to be .html. Other questions? No problem, Ariel. I did not notice you were unmuted either.
Can you just remind me to the import expert, the newer version of it? Do you put that little bit of text module in the package.json or the package lock one?
Package.json. You should never edit package lock.json on your own. That is a file that the computer is using to keep track of all the versions and dependencies under the hood that NPM is using. So you're going to put that, it doesn't matter what order you put it in your package.json. I just threw it at the end of mine. So at the last line, I put another comma in. And then you do because it's .json, it's very picky around the quotes. So you've got to do your quote type, close quote, colon, and then open quote, and then module, and then close quote.
Okay, that's what I had in my notes where to put it, but it looks different now. I don't know if I did something to it. I reinstalled it just in case, and it looks the same, but I don't have like the 2 curly braces at the bottom. I only have 1 now for some reason. And I remember putting them between the 2. That's what I had in my notes. So then I was
Yeah.
like, oh, the package lock one has 2 curly braces. Maybe that's where we put it.
No, definitely don't want to be editing your package lock.json. That's a newer file that NPM is creating, but it makes it so the installs go much faster under the hood. But
Should I just add a curly brace?
yeah, if
Okay,
you
I'll try that.
if you add it and then if you just run like npm install and hit enter, it should validate your package.json. So if you don't get any errors there, that means you fixed it.
Okay.
And
Thanks.
if you
I'll try
do
that.
get it, if you do get an error, it should tell you like unexpected end of input, which means you're missing your closing curly brace, or like, you know, unexpected string where you're just missing a quote or something like that.
Okay. Thanks. I'll try that.
Latonia, am I allowed to cheat and use Bootstrap Grid?
Absolutely.
Okay, then yeah, I'm happy to do that example for you. Okay, so I'm going to come in. Let me get my screen share working. I'm going to get started with going over to getbootstrap.com, and I'm going to click Get Started. And I'm going to just grab my CSS. Always a good idea to grab your JS as well, but because we were working only with a grid, I happen to know that I'm not going to need it. Okay, so I drop that in, I save. I'm
Quick
on.
question, Max, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
If we put in the JS and the bundle, is that okay? Like it's not,
Yeah.
if we don't, okay.
You only need the bundle. You don't need the separate section. It's either one or the other. But if you grab this JS, it's not going to do any harm. So if we go back to our code and drop that in down here, that's also fine to do. And that shouldn't affect anything. So if we go back over to our browser and we refresh, we notice our margins changed a little bit, our default font, all of that kind of stuff. That's what's telling us, okay, Bootstrap is successfully pulling in. Okay, so you requested border boxes around sections where things clearly are in one row with 2 items side by side. So let's start with the items side by side, and then we can go back and add our borders to them. So I'm going to come in here, and I am going to create my div class equals container. And so whenever we're working with rows and columns, Bootstrap likes that we put everything in one master container. You can always use containers in containers, but the whole grid system just is more friendly when we use our outer container. So I'm going to move my H tag into that. And just to make sure that's working, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to refresh, and that scooted it over. So I lied. I'm going to use a border on our container just so we've got a better visualization of that. So I like to use the inspect tools first and then back my way back into the code to make it show up. So I'm going to right click inspect, and I'm going to pop open my body tag and my div container and just hover over that. And that's showing me the margin and the padding and then the size of the div itself. So the orangish color is showing me my margin, and then my greenish color is showing me my padding. The other way that we can jump to the container is if we use, let me blow up my console, my inspect. I can click on this tool here, hover over page 1, and that will also jump me to the right spot on my container or my H1. So I'm going to click on my div class container. So that's what I know that I'm working with. And over here, it's showing me everything under the hood that Bootstrap is doing for us on that container class. So I'm going to scroll all the way down. And if you can't remember the colors, if you hover over the margin, you'll see that it shows up as orange up at the top. And then if we slide over to our padding, you can show it just highlighting the green there. So I'm going to scroll all the way back up to the top. And in my element.style, I'm going to put a border in here, and I can do 1px, which is going to be the thickness of the line, what kind of line that I want. So I will say solid, and then I can add a color in there like blue, and that's going to help us see where that is at. Now, the downside to doing this is when I refresh, that border goes away. So this is more of a quick way to sandbox around in your code and kind of figure out what you want it to look like. So if we were in here and we said, oh, I wonder what a 5px solid blue border looks like, we're able to see that more quickly as opposed to saving our code, bouncing back to Chrome, and going back and forth. So I'm going to come in here and I will add a style tag in here just because we don't have our CSS linked. And I will add that border in here as 1px solid and blue. Okay, so you asked, how do we get two things side by side? If we are using the Bootstrap grid example, before we can use a column, we've got to contain everything in a row first. So we're going to say div class equals row. And then down in here, I can do a div class equals col. And if we don't specify a number, that means all the columns will be equal size. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say col1, save it. And before we even do our col2, we have col1 here, but it's kind of hard to see it. So if I come here and hover over it, we can see that is taking up the entire space. See you, Kelly. So if I come over here and I do my background as, let's say, red, we can easily see that that is taking everything up. So I'm going to come back to my code. I will add a style here, and my style will be a background of red. And that's probably also going to make my text hard to read. So I will make my text color white. And then I'm going to take this whole row, copy and paste it down and say col2, and I will make this one green. So I come back to my browser, I refresh, and now we've got our two items side by side, and we can do whatever we want in the two of them. Now, the other option is if you go, well, I don't want columns, I would literally like col1 to show up to right next to col2. We could also just make those inline elements. So I'm going to comment all of this out, and we can do our div of, well, we'll just do a div. And then we can use a span tag. And the span tag is different from the div tag in that it works as an inline element. So inline literally means you've got a line and you're just chaining them together. Blocks by default are going to default to 100% width when you use it in a div. So that's why it's always pushing it down onto the next line. So if we use our span tag, we could just say some text here, and then create another span tag and say more text goes here. And then we just need to add a space between them. So if I save that and I refresh, we get our some text here, more text goes here, because those are both inline. And to prove that, we can click on one of them, and it may not show it in here because there's not a specific style defaulting to that. Well, it is defaulting to it, so it's not why it's showing up. So if you go to computed, you can actually go into the filter here and type in display, and it will show you that it is displaying as inline. And the only reason it's grayed out there is because that's the default. So again, the difference between these two tabs, the styles tab is going to show you any styles that you have written that are applying to the object. But if you hop into computed, this is what the browser has figured out it should be using if it didn't find it in your styles tag. So 90% of the time when I'm working with styles, I'm in my styles tag because it's something Bootstrap has dropped in for me, or something that I've written in my CSS that I didn't realize is applying to this element. But it is super helpful to go into your computed tag and find some things in here sometimes. Latonia, did that meet your requirements? Perfect. And I say requirements partly as a joke, but also as how I work as a professional developer. My boss will come up with some idea and I go, yeah, that's great. You've got to document it. And so he'll sit down, come up with requirements of it's, when I click on this button, it's got to do this. And, when we move over to this page, it's got to show up over here, and whatever it is, he'll write those requirements. Newer project management, those requirements will be written as a user story. So it will actually say something like, when the user clicks on the button in the nav bar, they need to go to the contact page. And so I will get that list of requirements and then go into the code and one by one check off those requirements. Now, sometimes the order of the requirements isn't correct, or the requirement will actually be layering in several steps of like, oh, when the user hit save, it should save. Well, okay, but that's a database step, and we've got to update database tables and all kinds of stuff behind the scenes there. So the requirements and the to-do, your punch lists aren't always exactly the same. But in the professional world, if you're working in a team, hopefully you are getting well-written requirements. So we can make sure everything that is getting done that should be. And yes, Latonia, keep thinking of requirements, thinking of everything that needs to be done, and then taking that a step further and going, okay, what order am I going to tackle these requirements in? And do these requirements have any subtasks underneath them that will help me stay on track is definitely a good way to think. Can you see the layout tab in the inspect element styles? Yeah, I don't think I've actually ever used the layout tab. There's no grid layouts found on this page. I wonder if I comment that back in what that looks like. So it still didn't find any grid layouts, which is interesting because Bootstrap is supposed to be using CSS grid under the hood. But I suppose that this would be helpful with debugging anything going wrong with Flexbox or figuring out why something isn't flexing the size that it should be. I can't say that I've ever used this tab. Used event listeners once in a blue moon, so we can figure out like our on click is an example of an event. So if multiple events were firing at the same time, we could use this event listeners tab over here on the right to kind of figure out what event listeners are tied to the button. But I can say that I spend 90% of my time in styles, about 10% of my time in computed, and I can't say that I've really ever used the other tabs in here. But I also tend to not lean to front end. I tend to lean towards back end. So I am not the UI expert who is using the dev tools.
I'll throw out there real quick, the accessibility tab is really, really helpful if you have to make accessible web applications. I've used that a ton. So.
Yeah, and Chrome has started to do some really great things with accessibility. Like they will warn you if the contrast of your text is not enough between the background. So if you put black on black, Chrome will yell at you and go, hey, the contrast ratio isn't right here. But accessibility programming, especially in the front end, has gotten a lot more focused in the past couple of years, thanks to some lawsuits around requiring accessibility. Other questions?
Did you see Mel's question? He would like export, import.
Export, import, you got it. Any requests on require with module.exports or export, import, or both? Well, let's start with require and then work our way to our export, import. So I will start from scratch on that. So the assignment was just to get export import working. You can either use require, which is built into Node. And then we will also use export import, which requires that tweak of the package.json file to get Node ready for the import export syntax, which is a little bit newer in JavaScript. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to save it. And I'm going to be good because we're using package.json. I'm going to make a new folder. So I will come over. I'm going to close out of this altogether. I'm going to do a new window. I will file open, and I'm going to go to where I keep my code, which happens to be on my desktop in CIC in the my code folder. And I will just call this import export here and pop that open in VS Code. Okay, so I'm going to start with two files. The first file I will call import.js, and the second file I will call export.js. So I'm going to pop open either one of these in the integrated terminal. And we also have to get our project set up for NPM. So what we're going to do is we're going to call NPM init. And then as long as you don't have any spaces in your folder name, this should run fine and create your package.json file over on the left. If you do have spaces in your name, you can leave off this -y here. And that will just ask you to name the project, and then you just have to name it without any spaces in it or any slashes in it. Okay, so let's start with our import using require. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say function my function1, and we will console.log out office hours. So of course I can go into my terminal, I can run node.export.js, and nothing happens. Well, why did nothing happen? Because I declared my function, but I never called it. So down here, I need to just call my func1 with my parentheses, run it, and I get my office hours printing out. Okay, great. But now I would like to be able to call my func1 from my import file over here. So in order to get the export working, in order to basically tell this file, hey, give other files access to my func1, we need to use this special terminology, module.exports. And in here, we can say my func1. So now we come over to our import and we say const my func1 equals, and then we're going to use another special word, require. So we put in as the parameter quotes, and then we give it the file path. So the // is what's telling it, look in this exact folder and look in this folder for a file called export.js. So now we come over here and we say my func1 and we run that, and we hop back over to our export and make sure we remove the call to my func1, which we did. So we save it, we come over here, we run our node export.js, and we get nothing. Because you have to run our import.js, not our export.js. So we run our import.js, and now we get our office hours coming out. Okay, that's great, but what if we want to export multiple functions? So let's go back to our export, and we're going to just copy and paste this and call it 2. And we'll just call this class. Okay, well, now we run into this problem of we can only module.exports one thing, but that thing can be either a function or it can be an object as well. So what we're going to do is we are going to wrap this in an object and then add in our myfunc2. But because we're exporting two things, now when we import it on the other side, we need to give it a heads up that there's an object coming back and not just the function. So what we do is we wrap those in our curly braces to let it know it's an object. And this notion is object destructuring. So if you're curious more about the syntax of JavaScript, object destructuring is a whole topic you can go down into. But now we can give it myfunc2 as well. And then we also have to call our myfunc2. Okay, so I come back over here, I run my node import.js, and I get both my office hours and my class coming out. Okay, that's great. That is what is known as the common JS syntax for importing and exporting files. But what happens if we want to use that import export, which is what you'll be seeing more in React, and that is known as the ES6 module syntax for importing and exporting. So I'm going to create two new files here. I will call this export2.js, and I will call this import2.js. Okay. Because we are using import export, we have to give Node a heads up of that. So we are going to say type, and then we add in the word module. And again, that's because we are using ES6 modules here. And that just helps Node understand what import export is as opposed to using require. So I'm going to save that. Notice I added a little comma up here because I added it to the end of the file. Because this is .json and not just .js, it's very picky on the commas, the closing braces, and all of that fun stuff. Okay, so very similar over here in our, I'm going to just close out our export and our import so we're not lost. In our export, now we can use the word export. So we're going to say export function, and we'll call this myfunc3, and we will console.log out hello. Okay, so we exported our function, so now we can go import our function. So we come over to import, and we say import myfunc3 from, and then we're going to say export to, and I believe the file extensions are optional, but doesn't hurt to throw it in there. And now that we're here, we can call our myfunc3, save it, run it, come over here, and make sure we are running the right file, import to .js. And when we run that, we get the requested module. My export to does not have a provide a default name back. So we named it here. And so basically it is looking for the default export. So there are two ways of fixing this. We can either add the word in default here, and if we run that and run it, our code runs fine. Or we can hop over to our import and add our curly braces here, because export, you can export multiple things coming out of an import export syntax. So we can come over here, we can remove our default, save it, run it, and we're good to go. And so just to carry this on, we can export our function named myfunc4 and console log out our world, and then don't forget our curly braces. Now, when we come over to our import, we can just comma separate these and say myfunc4 and call our myfunc4. And we get our hello and our world. Correct. Yeah, you've got to export your functions first, Dominique, before you can import them. It's kind of like an access thing of the export file won't give you access to functions in it until you export them. And then when you import them, the import lines up with the export, so it knows exactly what's matching up there. Any other questions on import, export, or require before I move on to a question from Latonia?
I definitely have some problems in my package JSON that reinstalling it didn't seem to fix, but I don't want to hold everybody else up. So
go ahead and share your screen.
At the end. Okay.
It will probably be a quick fix.
Okay. Okay, so it doesn't like the name here.
The name probably isn't going to cause you problems.
Okay.
If
then
you,
also this looks wrong. I noticed yours said export here.
yeah, whatever file it detects, it will drop in there. But we aren't using that property in the package.json. That's more important for like when you start working with servers. So that shouldn't cause any problems. If you scroll down,
I was trying to add my
type module.
right, yeah. So where did I have that? Here.
Yep.
Right.
So yep, you got it.
Right. And then there's no second curly brace there anymore. And when I put
That's
one
fine.
in,
So
it
that
doesn't
should
like
that
it.
should be
It doesn't like
going
comma.
after line 15. So go ahead and remove that.
Okay.
And then after, put your cursor on the end of line 15 and
Oh,
paste.
okay. All right.
And
So
that's where
the
it should be.
curly brace goes here.
Nope.
No?
You haven't. That's correct.
No
So if
extra
you,
curly brace. Okay.
correct. If you scroll up, this should look a lot like a JavaScript object, just with a couple more quotes.
Okay.
And so we've got our closing brace for line 17 that's matching up with line 1. So
Okay.
it is possible that you had the curly brace coming. You were trying to match it up on that curly brace, and that may be the
I
problem.
was doing it all at the bottom because that's what we did in class, and somehow we had 2 curly braces there in class, and I was putting it between them. I don't know. That's why I had my little notes like that.
Yeah, basically you can put this type module as long as it is at like the root level of the
Okay.
object.
Okay.
And that should work for you. And if you run your npm install, you also shouldn't get any errors. And npm
Okay.
install is like validating your JSON file to make sure there aren't any problems.
Oh, I was supposed to be running npm install, not init. That's what I was doing wrong.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. You don't need the negative Y?
No.
Okay.
And yep, it didn't return any errors. So you're good to go there.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Carolyn, we can't really use import export on a web page yet, which is why we started using it just in running it in Node instead of using it in the browser. The require syntax is specific to Node and not just all of JavaScript. And then the ES6 module syntax is supported by any newer version of JavaScript, but those newer versions get a little temperamental on browsers because not all browsers are up to date on the latest JavaScript version. So the good news is React solves all of that for you by using a really cool technology called Webpack under the hood. That's kind of bundling all of your JavaScript up and taking care of all the imports and exports and requires and all of that for you. So I can't easily just pop open some JavaScript and show that import export is working inside the browser. But you will definitely be using a lot of them in React. And so you will get a lot of practice, less practice with an export, but you'll be using a ton of imports in your, no, I take it back. You'll get export practice too in React. You will be using both your imports and your exports. I was thinking of class components still, Ryan, just to show you how old I am with React.
I know.
So you will get plenty of practice using them in a web page once you start React in 3 weeks with Joey.
Okay, I know, I forget which module, if it was for Gus or for Caitlin, but it was the accessibility module with Dana. One of the sites I chose and that we worked on in a group practice was the National Education Association site, because I used to work there and I built their search engine, which is no longer there. Anyway, I noticed a lot of web packs. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I opened that up to see like what it was and everything. So it's very interesting.
Yeah,
so
Webpack
definitely
is
on the cutting edge. They're doing a good job with their web development. So
yes, Webpack is literally packing all of your code together with all dependencies from React and your packages and your package.json and all of that. So Webpack, we will be using that. I'm sure Joey will be using a very handy thing called Create React App. And what that does for you is it installs Webpack and it gets it all set up and it gets your React installed and any dependencies in React and really kind of gives you a good starting point for any React app. So you guys will be diving into that a little bit more. But that is some magic technology that unlocks solving all kinds of configuration problems for you. I am going to circle back to Latonia's question of using more than one script.js file in the same HTML, all linked files, how do they go in relation to each other, and reasons you would need more than one script.js. So I'm going to jump back to the example we were using with our grid. Hopefully, if I can find that file. And I know I'm not sharing my screen. I will in one moment. Okay, so we're back to our beautiful blue, red, and green HTML that we were using. So this actually ties into Carolyn's question a little bit of before the days of import export, we had script tags. And so we would just include a bunch of script tags in there. And before, if we go back to the documentation, Webpack creates ultimately a bundle of your JavaScript code that is literally all bundled together. But back in the day, we didn't even have bundles. So if you wanted to use multiple JavaScript libraries or multiple JavaScript packages, as they're considered now, you would have to include separate script tags for each one of them. And so Bootstrap is down here, and Bootstrap is great, but Bootstrap has a dependency on a library called Popper. And Popper is not naturally included as part of Bootstrap. So in order to use, and they say tooltips or popovers, you need to use the Popper library as well. So we come over here, we grab this script tag, we throw it down here, and we save, and then we come back over to our Bootstrap, and the order matters here. So then we grab Bootstrap, we come back over, we add that tag, and we save, and we get both our Popper library and our Bootstrap JavaScript library. Now, the problem here is if we flip the two of these, Bootstrap may run and go and look for some Popper code, and Popper may not have loaded yet. So what we do here is we make sure the order is correct so that they are loading at the same time or in sequentially. Now, what happens if we want our own script tag here? Well, we would put that at the end of these two, right? So we would say our script source equals script.js, and we would throw that in there. And again, that is just like our CSS. We want to make sure we are loading those in order. So if we want to override any of the Bootstrap JavaScript, we are able to do it then. So what the browser is really doing is it's taking this entire popper min.js file and running all of that. And then it is going out and it's getting this bootstrap min.js and it's running all of that JavaScript. And then finally, it would run your script.js and run all of that. So if you had some JavaScript in your script.js you wanted to overwrite in Bootstrap, you could. It is much less likely that you want to override Bootstrap code and more likely that you want to override the Bootstrap CSS. So it's pretty rare for you to be overriding Bootstrap JavaScript, but it is very common for you to go, hey, the Bootstrap button is blue, but I want the Bootstrap button to be green, right? And so that is why the C in CSS, cascading style sheets, it's much more common to override styling than it is to override functionality in Bootstrap. But it is totally possible for you to use a Bootstrap button and then fire off that on-click event with your script tag. Weirdly, import-export order matters less in React. The way the components are structured, it's very rare that the order of the import matters. Kind of like with functions, right? How we declared all of our functions, but the order of the functions didn't matter. What mattered was the order that we called those functions. The same goes for kind of your import-export. So too long didn't read, summarize on all of that is that CSS order is much more important than JavaScript order, but JavaScript order every now and then can matter. And to your, I think, Latonia, you asked the question of when would you need more than one script.js file. You will find in your React code that your app is getting so big that you don't want to put it all into one file, which you can do and the browser will do fine, but you may want to start splitting out your code and saying, hey, I've got some JavaScript that handles the contact form. There's no reason that needs to be on the script.js that is on my index page. So you may start breaking it out and having a script.js file one that is called contact.js and another one that's called index.js and whatever it is. And different libraries or frameworks tackle that differently. So React will take this component approach of any interactivity and any code that you're using in your component all go in one file. And then you've got a separate file for each one of your components. Angular does it a little differently. And whenever you add a new component, it automatically creates a HTML file for you and a JavaScript file for you, and whatever other files Angular needs for that. So different ways of organizing your code. But when you start getting into React, React starts grouping your code to be more functional. So like, what does this component need to show up? And what functions does this component need in order to interact properly or react properly? And so different ways of organizing your code. But when you are using your vanilla JavaScript, breaking up the files based off of what HTML page they're showing on can be a good approach.
And in that, I'm sorry, I just want to jump in real quick. In that, the only files we can really name whatever we want as long as they have the .js on them are the script files, right? Like your style should be style.css.
No, you can name style.css whatever you want as long as it matches in your link tag.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yep, the file extension is important. So you do have to name them .css and .js. But as long as the file extensions are correct, and be careful with spaces. Some browsers may handle spaces in file names, other ones won't. So I encourage you never to, if you're creating a file, just don't put a space in it. Question, Carolyn.
Two, actually. One just occurred to me from LaTonya's question. So index.html, you wouldn't have to name it that as long as everything is connected, right?
Yeah, index is the one exception.
Kind of, yeah, because that's where it all starts.
When you're working on your files locally and you're not trying to deploy them up to a web server or get them online, it doesn't actually have to be called index.html. But what index.html is telling it is when I visit google.com, what page should match up with google.com, that's the index. Yeah. So if you told everyone your homepage was maxmatthews.com/home.html, then it would be completely fine to name your file home.html and the web server would know to go right to it. But when you say maxmatthews.com, it goes, okay, what file matches up with maxmatthews.com? And that is the index.html. So less important when you're working on local files and just having them on your computer. But when you go to actually publish them onto the internet, the index.html is more important.
Yeah, no, that's the whole better understanding of why, because I always knew it was kind of the sacred one. Also, what you just did, putting in the popper and the bootstrap and all that, should that maybe be just a practice that we just put it in there?
Yeah, it's generally best practice whenever you're using Bootstrap to include the JavaScript bundle, because what you'll end up running into is you'll go, I can't understand why my modal isn't working. This really should be working. And it turns out that the modal component doesn't work unless you have the Bootstrap JavaScript in there. So it's tricky because Bootstrap is not only a styling library, it is also a functionality library, right? So when you click on that button and the modal opens up, that doesn't happen with just CSS. That takes JavaScript in order to make that work. So I've probably been bad in the past and have been just grabbing the style sheet because I know I'm only working with the grid, or like I know in advance what components I'm working with, and I've got a better history of what ones require JavaScript and what ones don't. But it is considered best practice to grab both the script tag and the link. And with how fast internet connections are these days, the script tag is not likely to slow down your web page.
So the bundle includes the popper.
Correct.
I don't think I was putting that in. That might explain a lot of things. So.
And the popper is only used for tooltips and popovers.
Yeah, you wouldn't really have to have it for things to work, but it's helpful.
Correct. The popper you only need for tooltips and for popovers, but there are other things like a modal that you need the Bootstrap JavaScript for.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Okay. And I thought of a third question and it flew away, so I'll wait.
No
Thank you.
problem. Other questions? We are right on time. How's everyone feeling about the homework? Feel like you're making good progress? Good.
Thanks to our session earlier, I'm a little less not good. Thank you. We'll have to reschedule another one, right? Anyway, thank you.
Calendly's always open.
Okay, I just do it. Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, we will wrap it up here. I will be around all weekend. So if you guys do have questions, feel free to post them in Slack, whether it's related to the homework or not. I'm going to try and get everyone's homework graded on Monday, just so Ryan has a good starting point for you guys. But if you're behind, don't stress about getting the assignment turned in a day or two late. We can always go back and grade that after the fact.
Susan did post a question in Slack, just so that you're aware that it's there. And she couldn't make it to office hours, but she did post a question in Slack in the student pasted channel.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Susan, if you're watching this recording afterwards, yes, the dot map is basically saying, look at the array called students. And the reason that we have access to dot map is because students is an array. So dot map, you've got it completely right. Go into the function and in that function, give me access to each individual student. So dot map is another kind of a loop. And dot map is under the hood looping over everything. We just use dot map instead of our for of because we specifically know we want to create a new array from an existing array, which is a very common thing to do while you're coding. So yes, Susan, you're correct. The answer is ABC, and that would return in a new array, which in the example we called students' names. And then the wording dot map is, yes, it is twofold. One, we have access to dot map because we are calling it on an array. And two, the computer knows to return a new array because we are using that dot map function. So yes, you are completely spot on there. All right. Well, you guys enjoy your weekend. Hopefully it looks like you're getting some rare sun in upstate New York. So enjoy that. I'm going to go find a place to hike.
Yeah, I'm enjoying being at the dining room table doing all this stuff, but it's awesome. So we're okay. I'll step outside maybe at some point. Have a great weekend, everybody. See y'all Monday.
Thanks. See you guys.
Max. Oh, we won't see you. Cry.
I'll be lingering around just
Yes.
like Joey was,
We'll
throwing
be
in little
lurking.